Today we're gonna take a classic dish and turn it into soup. We are gonna make Swedish meatball soup. We're gonna do it in the pressure cooker, and it is super easy and quick enough for an easy weeknight meal. Welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. Today's recipe for a Swedish meatball soup is super easy. Even making the homemade meatballs, which I strongly advise that you do because they have flavors added in there that just complements the soup and gives us that feeling that we're really eating Swedish meatballs in soup form, okay? You can substitute in the Italian meatballs that are already made and they're frozen, and that's gonna work fine in the recipe, but it's not gonna give you the same flavor, okay? The first thing we're gonna do is mix up our meatball mix, okay? What I'm using for this is 1 pound of 80/20 ground beef and 1 pound of 85/15 ground pork. I find this mixture to be absolutely perfect in the fat levels and the juiciness of the meatballs and of course the flavor. You can absolutely substitute in all ground beef if you didn't want to put in the pork. That's no problem. You could even substitute all pork if you didn't want the ground beef. That's no problem either. It's going to throw off the flavors just a little bit, but nothing that you're going to really notice or that's going to affect your soup, where people aren't going to like it. It's going to be delicious no matter what you use. All right, next thing we're going to put in is 1 large egg. And seasonings. This is where the magic really happens. So this is the seasoning blend that I'm using for the meatballs. It is a combination of sea salt, which is fine grind sea salt, black pepper, onion powder, a little bit of allspice, and a little bit of nutmeg. That nutmeg and allspice is the secret. So please make your meatballs, don't buy them. And then we're gonna put in 1 tablespoon of Dijon mustard and 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. Now, the mustard doesn't make them taste mustardy, but it does balance them out, so please include it. Yellow mustard is not the same, but you could use a spicy brown mustard if you had that on hand. Add those in. Now for the binder, I'm using 1/2 cup of plain breadcrumbs. My mom always makes her meatballs and her meatloaf with oats, and so you can certainly substitute that in for the plain breadcrumbs and you'll be fine. All right, the final ingredient going in is 1/4 cup of heavy whipping cream. You can use milk, you can use half and half, you could use water, you could use beef broth, it doesn't matter. The reason why I'm using the heavy whipping cream is because we use some heavy whipping cream in the soup base. So I figured carry that along in the recipe so that you don't have to buy 2 different types of milk. If you don't have whole milk on hand and heavy cream, you can just use the heavy cream for both. But if you don't have enough heavy cream or you don't want to use the heavy cream in the soup base, then by all means, go ahead and use whole milk, it's fine. Beef broth, it's fine. Yogurt's fine. Sour cream, fine, okay? All right, now we get to mixing. You can mix this with a spatula, but it's gonna take you a really long time. It's very cumbersome. You could also mix it with a hand mixer on very low speed, or you could use your paddle attachment on your KitchenAid. But there's nothing better than your clean hands to go in and really get this combined well. So that's what I'm gonna use, and just turn it over and just start to mix everything up. By squeezing it together, turning it over, getting to the bottom, making sure that all of your seasonings are well dispersed. And we just do this and it takes, I don't know, maybe 2 to 3 minutes. All right, that looks great. I'm gonna wash my hands, then we're gonna get the pressure cooker set up to sear the meatballs. So the first thing I'm gonna do is turn it on, go to sear saute, and I always say we want high. High is what we want. High is not what we want for this recipe. We want to go down to medium high and hit start. Let the pot heat up for about 2 minutes or so. Then we're going to add in 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Now, one of the differences between this recipe and if I'm actually making Swedish meatballs is I don't worry too much about the shape of the meatball. So I don't worry about rolling them into perfect balls. I simply scoop them out, put them in the pot and let them sear, which will help hold them together when we go to pressure cook the soup. It also partially cooks them because we go on a very, very short pressure cooking time so that we don't overcook our noodles. What I'm using is a Pampered Chef scoop that is 1 tablespoon. That works perfectly. It gives you bite-sized meatballs in your soup. However, if you wanted your meatballs to be bigger, then use a bigger scoop. It's perfectly fine. You just want to make sure that you cook them until they are about 60 to 70% done if they're bigger, so that they are not undercooked at the end of the pressure cooking time. So the oil is heated in the pot, and now I'm just gonna scoop out these meatballs just like that and pop them in. That's all you need to do. What I do with the meatballs, because this is quite a bit of meatball mixture, is I will line the bottom of the pot with the meatballs, and then once they sear on one side, flip them over, and then I push them to the side to make room for more. You could also do this in batches if you prefer. So you could do 1 batch of meatballs, take them out, do another batch, whatever you feel comfortable with. But I find this to be a little bit quicker, and I don't have to transfer the meatballs in and out of the pot. All right, last meatball in. Now I'll just let those sear, continue to stir until the meatballs are about 50 to 60% done, and I'm no longer seeing any pink on the outside of the meatballs. That means they're completely seared. Then we will get on to building our pressure cooker Swedish meatball soup. And I don't think I mentioned this before, but we are using the pressure cook function. Any pressure cooker will work. I'm using the Ninja Foodi 6.5 quart, but you could use the 8 quart, no changes in the recipe at all. If you use the stainless steel pot, you may find you need to take your heat down to medium instead of medium high, because stainless steel conducts heat a little bit better than the ceramic coated. So you might find that your meatballs are starting to burn. This process of making the meatballs, scooping them out and sauteing them takes a good 15 to 20 minutes, okay? So you can plan for that. That is a good part of the recipe time though. So the rest of it, super quick. Now, I no longer see any bright pink in the meatballs, so I am gonna deglaze the pot with 4 cups of beef broth. Now, if you don't wanna leave the fat in there, you can absolutely strain your meatballs and drain the fat off of them and then put the meatballs back into the pot. That's perfectly fine. I just leave it in because it just creates a lot of flavor in the soup. So I leave it in. 4 cups of beef broth. Then when you deglaze the pot, you leave it on. So leave the sear saute on, take your spatula and scrape along the bottom of the pot to release any fond or brown bits, as they're also called, into the soup. Not only does that bring flavor into the soup base itself, but it also helps us prevent that water notice, because if a pressure cooker thinks that there's something burning on the bottom of the pot, it will give us the water notice even if there's plenty of thin liquid in the pot. So we want to make sure we scrape that off, and then we can add the rest of the ingredients to our soup. All right, that feels great. Now, we have 4 cups of beef broth already in there. I'm adding another 20 ounces of beef consomme. I use the Campbell's brand. It's a little gelatinous sometimes. Now, if it's very warm in your house, it may come out as just a thin liquid. That's okay too. This brings such a good depth of flavor to the soup that I really noticed a difference between using it and using a total of 6 cups of beef stock. So you could do either beef stock, beef broth, total of 6 cups, or 4 cups of the beef broth and a little over 2 cups of the consomme. So just over 2 cups of consomme is 2 cans. They come, I think they're 10-ounce cans. So, all right, stir that together. You'll automatically see a little darker color coming into the soup. It's just amazing. All right, now for the noodles. I am using medium wide egg noodles, not extra broad, not extra wide, medium wide. They are gonna give you the best experience, I think, in the soup. And by experience, I mean eating experience. They're not too big and they look beautiful in the soup. Can you use the extra wide? Of course you can. I'm using 6 ounces, which is just shy of 3 cups, but you could use up to 8 ounces, depending on how noodly you like your soup. I thought the 8 ounces was a little bit too much and took away from the meatballs and the broth just a tad more than I would like. So I went down to 6 ounces, which again is roughly about 3 cups. And I have 2 different brands in here, which is why you can see 2 different colors. Doesn't matter which brand you use. I think I have a Kroger brand and a Walmart brand in here. It'll be fine. Stir those in. And then we're gonna add in the last ingredients, a half of a tablespoon of white wine vinegar, which I found balanced out the soup perfectly. Can you omit it? Absolutely. Can you add it at the end? Absolutely. But a half of a tablespoon is what I found worked the best. Now for the spice blend. I use the same type of spices in the meatballs and in the soup base, but I don't use the onion powder. So I used salt, a little bit of nutmeg, a little bit of allspice, and a little bit of black pepper. You can add in the onion powder, or you could add in some garlic powder if you wanted. You know, it's your soup, make it how you like it. But I found that these are very simple spices and they really give great flavor to the soup. So just sprinkle those on top. Give it all a stir, and then we're gonna put our pressure lid on. All right, that looks good. Now you can turn the pressure cooker off. Put your pressure lid on. Make sure you are sealed in the back here so that we can go under pressure. And turn the pressure cooker back on. We want to go to pressure cook. High is what we want, but we want to take our time down to 1 minute. Our pot is hot, the ingredients are hot, even the broth is warmed up by now. It is gonna take between 5 and 7 minutes for this pot to come to pressure. If you have a larger pressure cooker, an 8-quart, or even bigger than that, it's gonna take a little bit longer. No worries though, you're not gonna overcook anything. Then we will do 1 minute pressure cook time with a 1 minute natural release. We will release the rest of the pressure, and then we'll finish off the soup with a little bit of cream, and we'll give it a taste. Okay, the pin has dropped. That means all the pressure has been released and it is safe to open up the lid. It took 7 minutes to come to pressure. We pressure cooked on high for 1 minute. We did a 1 minute natural release, meaning we didn't do anything. We just let the pot sit as it counted up 1 minute. Then I manually released the rest of the pressure, and it took just over 4 minutes, maybe 4.5 minutes for all the pressure to release. When you open up the lid, do that away from you because it's going to be extremely steamy. So I like to hold the lid like this and kind of direct the steam away from me. And we have our beautiful soup, but it's not quite done yet because we need to turn it into a nice creamy soup. What I have here is 1/2 of a cup of heavy whipping cream. Now, the pressure cooker Swedish meatball soup that I like has a thin soup base. It's not really thick because I feel like if I wanted a real thick gravy-like base, I would just make Swedish meatballs, okay? So I just use the cream. But if you wanted it to be a little bit thicker, mix in 2 tablespoons of flour right in your cream before you pour it into your pot. And then you're gonna simmer it for about 5 minutes if you added the flour so that you can cook the flour taste out. But I don't need to do that because I'm not gonna add the flour in. I find that the starch from the noodles does a good enough job at thickening the broth, and I think it's a perfect consistency. Another thing to note is if you add 8 ounces of the egg noodles instead of 6 ounces of egg noodles, you're gonna have a thicker broth because you have more starch being let out of the noodles into the broth, okay? All right, we are ready. We can dish it up now. So you can leave it on keep warm. You could turn it off. It doesn't make any difference. I do like to garnish with a little bit of fresh parsley, or you could use dried parsley. It's perfectly fine. If you use dried parsley, go ahead and throw it in the whole pot. It's not gonna make a difference. With the fresh, I like to garnish each bowl. I just think that fresh burst of flavor is amazing. But however you like it, or you don't have to garnish it at all. Or if you wanted some onions in there, chop up a few green onions and throw it in. That would be delicious. All right, there we go. Few little bits of parsley in there. And we have a beautiful Swedish meatball soup. These meatballs are amazing. They are a little bit rustic looking. If you wanted perfect meatballs, you can certainly roll them out, but I don't find that it's necessary in this recipe at all. And the noodles look absolutely perfectly cooked. You know, egg noodles cook very quickly. That's why we have such a short pressure cook time. All right, here we go. Oh my goodness. Wow. Oh my goodness. It is warm, it is very hot, but this tastes amazing. The broth is so flavorful. It is so delicious, but it is thin, okay? So keep that in mind. Use the flour if you want to. Those meatballs are amazing. They make the soup. So please, when you make this soup, make your own meatballs. It is totally worth it. Enjoy.